In this video, I'm going to tell you about the importance or non-importance of immersion in your wargaming. So right off the bat, what is immersion? Well, in tabletop wargaming, it's kind of how into the experience you might actually be. You know, immersion, you're immersing, you're getting into it. So it's not something that gets talked about too much with tabletop wargaming. You hear about it a lot more in video gaming. You know, you see people and they're playing a video game and it's like a driving game, and you see them and they lean this way and they lean that way, and you know, like that doesn't do anything. That doesn't help, but they're doing it because they're kind of immersed. I have messed around a little bit with VR here and there. Most recently was in the office at work, and it had these VR headset thing. And it was like a cartoony type game where these cartoon cowboy zombies were coming up and you had to shoot them with the little gun, you know, controller thing. And, you know, you get focused over there, and then there's a zombie that comes up and you weren't paying attention and then you come and you're like, whoa, there's no real zombie. It's not a real zombie. It's just it's lights that are bouncing around inside the screen that's real close to your face. But it's much easier for people to get immersed in the experience in something like video games. People get immersed in movies and things like that. You get immersed in books differently, but still, the question is, what about immersion in wargaming? In my humble opinion, immersion in wargaming is a lot of fun. It's something to strive for. I would not say that I will believe specifically that bullets are whizzing past my head when you roll some dice and you're shooting at some of my guys. I don't get quite that immersed. I'm not going to jump back in surprise or anything like that, because wargaming, you're watching the whole kind of battle from above, so you're very generally conscious of where things are. You may be startled a little bit or surprised when your opponent, let's say, drops a drop pod into a place you hadn't thought they were going to go for. But really, we're not talking about actual physical reaction in general. The immersion that comes, in my opinion, from wargaming usually comes from, at least for me, because I'm a hobby guy, how everything kind of looks. For me, a really nicely done table, something that is almost getting a little bit akin to like a diorama, but on a large, maybe 3x3, 4x4, 4-foot by 6-foot scale, that helps immensely with the immersion about how much I'm into the game, how much I'm enjoying it that way. All the models being painted nicely, that also helps get me into the immersion. A rule set that I'm familiar with and that I agree with. Agreeing with a rule set is very important. There are a lot of times when you are playing a game, maybe it's a new thing that you've gotten into, or someone's teaching you, or you're taking a demo, and then they explain a rule to you, and to you specifically, that doesn't make any sense. Like, well, why would I? I don't get it. Why would this require me to roll on a 20-sider and to do this and try to get a low number? That doesn't, and that can break the immersion. There's definitely just rules within a game that can break the immersion. So if you've got really great board, really great models, a great opponent, that can also help the immersion, and then just all the care and all that stuff, and understanding the rule set, it can be, I personally think, an experience like very few others. And that kind of thing can really be obviously a ton of fun, but you can become, it is so fun because it's becoming so immersive and you're really into it. And when a hard fought unit dies in the game, you don't jump back, you don't have a physical reaction like you would maybe when you're in VR and something jumps out at you, but you definitely have a reaction. You're really like, man, like these guys are going to die unless I can roll 2 6s, and then you do it. Obviously, you explode and you're happy and everything like that, and your opponent is very angry that you were so lucky as to pull off 2 6s, or whatever the deal might be. That kind of immersion makes those types of games the games that you will talk about in the future. Do you remember that time I needed to roll 2 6s and I did, or didn't, or whatever the deal would be? Those types of things are what make our gaming, I think at least, different than pretty much any other kind. But breaking immersion can also be, kind of a bummer, at least for, again, someone like myself. Like, a really kind of really, just sort of janky, sort of half-assed table. Yeah, we threw some green felt on it and stacked some books and stuff like that. Like when you're getting started, that's what you got. But when you really start to get into it, one of the reasons that the hobby and the craft becomes so important is because you want everything to look a certain way. I've gotten to the point now where there's certain pieces of terrain that I don't want to put on the table with other certain pieces of terrain that I own because they're not done quite in the same style. Like they might both be fantasy pieces, but I'm like, well, but this one's nicer than that one, or this one's, like I've got a bunch of different post-apocalyptic pieces. I've got some that are done in MDF, which I really like, and they're cool, and they're neat. And then I've got other ones that are done in resin and are a completely different sort of style. They're both shanty type houses, but one's a lot more angular, obviously, and flat because of the MDF nature, the that stuff. Whereas the other one, they're basically sculpted and took a lot more time to make up front and all that kind of stuff, but are also a lot heavier and took a lot longer to paint and all that kind of jazz. Those, like, I could mix them together on the table, but then in my eye, they're going to look completely weird. So I either usually use one set or the other, but I don't mix them, because in my mind, it breaks the immersion. Now, you've got players out there who really enjoy the play a lot more than they enjoy the immersive experience. They maybe don't paint their models, and they don't really care much about terrain. There are plenty of games out there that in tournament settings, they don't even really use real terrain. They use two-dimensional templates that say this is where the river would be, and this is a copse of woods or whatever. And so, if you're playing a very competitive game, you kind of need that to say, well, I'm either in or I'm not in, because it's very cut and dried. This shape, this is the terrain, and you're either in it completely or you're out of it a little bit, and it's very easy to spot, and nobody could say, well, I think I might be really in the terrain. I'm not, no, it's a piece of felt that's cut in an oval. You're either all the way in or you're not. In this situation, that's what you have to do, I think, for the very competitive type things. But when you want to have a nice, fun, in my opinion, immersive experience, sometimes the terrain specifically is a little difficult to sort of quantify. So if you're going for that whole kind of immersive thing, and you've got this sort of, I see it a lot in certain battle reports where they will sprinkle a lot of like kind of gravel, little tiny pieces of gravel all over the board, and little pieces of lichen, that little, weird mossy junk. Anyway, lichen, I think, is actually, that's a werewolf, I think, isn't it? Anyway, but the point is that they will spread all this stuff around, which looks really cool, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I look at it as a person watching a battle report, and I'm like, well, so how do you know whether you're in terrain or not in terrain? Because it's just sort of, and then, of course, the other part of my brain is like, well, they must have to vacuum that all up somehow or something after the game. I mean, it must take a really long time to scoop up all the extra little bits of plant particulate and rocks and then put those in a baggie. I don't know. What do you do? I've never done that kind of thing. It looks really cool in battle reports. There comes a line at which point I'm like, yeah, immersion's really cool, but I don't want to have to spread sand all over the place, because that's going to be a pain to pick up. So, every person's kind of got their immersion levels, and I think that's important. But I think that if you're going to be playing a fun game, your situation and how you like to have fun is obviously different than mine and anybody else's who's watching this video. But for me, at least, because I'm interested so much in the physicality of the hobby, the painting and the building and the constructing and all that stuff, I find that I want the entire table to look really nice and to look just everything just so, because that helps me enjoy the game even more. I haven't in a while, but we used to play a good amount of Flames of War. And when we would play Flames of War, we would spend nearly as much time playing the game as we would initially setting up our little village. We'd be figuring out where buildings should go and where our roads were going to go and what angles and all the little fields and all the junk like that. And that was really a very enjoyable part of the game. The shooting and the blowing up and all that was pretty cool too. But just the kind of construction part of it like that, at least for us, helped us get into it. Again, it was more immersive, and we just had a lot of fun. So I think immersion is always important. The trick is that different people's immersion factors are different. Some people get very immersed in the strategy of a game, so they don't care what the stuff looks like. They just want to make sure that they've got all their bases covered and they understand exactly every last little piece of it so that they can hopefully win the game, because they're really much more interested in the strategy than the craft of it. And then there's other people like myself who are terrible at strategy and not really all that concerned with it. They're concerned with having a good time and having a really cool, basically like trying to play in a museum diorama. That would be my perfect deal. If I could build something that fancy that, was relatively modular, somewhat, that's the way to do it for me to get really immersed. So you probably have I don't know, let's say an immersion level that's between, basically flat stuff on a flat thing, and you're playing on top of a, museum display. Where's yours? That's the question. And that's what you have to determine to help drive how much time you put into painting your models, how much time you put into either collecting terrain, buying terrain, or even just completely scratch building stuff because you can't find anything that's quite exactly what you want. That all is part of how we each kind of go forward in the hobby. And immersion is a big part of it.